You're listening to Skippycast. I'm David McFee. Skippycast is a podcast about hobo-like travel. This is the second and last interview that I will do that incorporates the television show Trailside. It's an interview with John Viehman, who was the host of Trailside for the first 3 seasons, as well as the host of Any Place Wild, the editor of Backpacker magazine, and much, much more. John has been active in a variety of local and national community service boards and received awards for his service accordingly. Of course, I was interested in him for his TV work, and that's primarily what we talked about. And if you don't know what Trailside is, now is the time to pause the audio, head over to YouTube and watch a few Trailside episodes, especially the ones with John. And after you've seen a few, at the very least the Appalachian Trail episodes, you will be ready for my conversation with John Viehman. Hi John, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, this has been a long time coming. I think I reached out to you well over a year ago after I'd spoken to Dan Mendez. And I wanted to talk to you for a while about Trailside, but, life got in the way. Thank you. I really appreciate you joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And you're ex-host of Trailside and Any Place Wild. And I don't really want to just say that because obviously your career is far more extensive than just working on those 2 shows, correct?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, but I put it this way: I had my 15 minutes of fame.
Your 15 minutes of fame lasted quite some time. I mean, here we are talking. And when did Any Place Wild start? What, 1993? No, sorry, Trailside, 1993, correct?
Trailside, yeah, I believe that was it was probably closer to 1991, but I'll go with 93. Sure, that sounds good.
I think that's when the actual release dates were on the videos. So that's probably where I'm getting that number for. So let's start at the beginning. I think I saw in one episode, it was the main episode that said you grew up in Minnesota, but you moved to Maine. What is your background and how did your love of the outdoors begin?
Well, you're right. I did grow up in Minnesota. Actually, a lot of people will know exactly what I'm talking about. I grew up in the pumpkin capital of the world. You know where that is, right?
You can tell by my accent. Yeah, I mean, I'm well versed in American geography.
No, well, in southern Minnesota, it's a big farming community. So every little town is the capital of some vegetable. And Owatonna, Minnesota, which is where I grew up, they were known to be the pumpkin capital of the world. And we were like right next to the broccoli capital and the green bean capital, And then you go to Wisconsin and everything's a cheese capital. So in southern Minnesota, everything's a pumpkin capital or a vegetable capital of some kind. So there you go.
How does that translate from you being Linus in the Great Pumpkin Patch to having a love of outdoors?
Oh, I mean, it's just small town life, I guess. I don't know if I could actually attest to, I didn't grow up in an outdoor family necessarily. I was, pretty much a normal kid in the Midwest. And, you grew up being exposed to a lot of things that maybe a more urban environment wouldn't have allowed me to participate in. I didn't see it as anything particularly unusual. I did the normal Boy Scouts, went to Boy Scout camp every year, and it was one of the highlights of my year. And then pretty much kept going that way. And then by the time I graduated from college, my first job was actually in the magazine publishing industry. And I went to work for a magazine called Canoe Magazine, which is no longer being published. But back then it was the magazine for canoeing and kayaking in the country. And I became the managing editor pretty much right out of journalism school. And I just fell in love with the content. Found it was very gratifying to me, and they just kept riding the outdoor wave from there.
So you went to school, J school. You went to school for journalism.
Journalism school at St. Thomas University in St. Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with those J schools. I was at the University of Missouri for a while, and your environmental or your eco recreation background began with your job.
It's a combination of things, but yeah, I was my job to be immersed in the outdoors, and particularly in the canoe world, canoeing and kayaking world, and being out on rivers. I mean, that was part of my job, was to be testing equipment, to be out using it, come back and write about it, to get to know all the people that were expert in that end of the outdoor world, and go to all the trade shows. And early on, I joined the board of what was then the American Rivers Conservation Council, which is
Hmm.
the predecessor to what today is a preeminent environmental group in Washington called American Rivers. So it was just part of the job as much as it was, my very strong personal interest in the environment, and trying to preserve the outdoor world that gave me such great joy and satisfaction, and was, I think, good for, of course, for humanity. So,
Well, because I think it's fair to say you've dedicated a lot of your life to the community service for outdoor, education and eco rec and things like that. I mean, I noticed from your bio you were heavily involved with the American Hiking Association. You say that you were a co-founder of the American Discovery Trail, National Trails Day co-founder. So, you've really dedicated a lot of your time to this sort of endeavor.
yeah, well, I think, it was professionally, it was my job to be immersed in the outdoors. And it's always been part of my personal philosophy to, not just take in the sense of make a living off the outdoors, but put something back. And really, that permeates my whole life, really, is this notion of paying it forward, and don't just be an extractive part of the process, but actually make a contribution and make it richer going forward in any way you can. And of course, that, in the world of canoeing, it was the American Canoe Association, the American Rivers Conservation Council. And then when I um, went on to become the editor and publisher of Backpacker Magazine, Adventure Travel, Cross Country Skier Magazine, it was about getting involved with the American Hiking Society, not just me personally, but make sure our our magazine brand was solidly behind the organizations that really protected the resource and the interests of people that were interested in hiking and backpacking. And American Discovery Trail, National Trails Day. That's all of what that was about. And I do want to just correct one thing. If anybody misunderstands the word co-founder, it doesn't mean that, I was just one of, say, two people that founded the American Discovery Trail or National Trails Day. There were a number of people involved. I was one of the people who was involved with founding American Discovery Trail and National Trails Day. But it was our group, or our team at Backpacker Magazine and the American Hiking Society. A lot of individuals were involved in those initiatives, but I'm very proud to say I was there on the ground level,
Hmm.
getting them off the ground. So,
I'm familiar with a lot of environmental initiatives. There's very rarely just one or two people anymore. There's always a few dozen co-founders to any one project.
oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you started with the Canoe magazine and you ended up at Backpacker. How did you actually get to Backpacker? Because that sounds and what did that involve? Because it sounds like a pretty much a dream job.
Well, backpacker, yeah, absolutely. They were all dream jobs, really. And again, at the time, you don't really realize that you're living the dream as much as you are. And they look even better when you look back on them.
Hmm.
But at the time, it was a great job, very personally and professionally satisfying. I worked for the company that owned Backpacker. They gave me a very, very open slate. Here's a blank slate. Here's a magazine. Make something out of it. At the time, I got involved with it. Rodale Press at the time, now Rodale Inc., now no longer in existence, actually,
Mm.
um, had just purchased Backpacker. And basically, I started with a shoebox as the editor of Backpacker Magazine, and had to build the editorial team and the branding. And of course, I worked with a lot of good people in that process. But my end of it was the editorial side,
Hmm.
and rebuilding the brand and making it a preeminent brand, which it still is today, and I'm very happy to see.
Yeah, it's still going strong. I mean, I have my digital subscription, that's for sure. So,
Yep.
okay, so how does Backpacker become editor and TV host of Trailside? How does
Yeah.
that? Because I mean, that's not exactly a linear progression.
No, well, in some ways it actually is. And um, when we were developing Backpacker and really bringing it into focus, I guess is the way to think of it, and really making it the authentic brand it is today. It was about bringing together a great team, and we did some just amazing things as far as repositioning the product and reinstilling authenticity to it. We also, along the way, had developed a small book publishing group. So we had books that we had produced that echoed our philosophy of the outdoors and making it accessible and giving a lot of good technical information for and practical information for people so they could do it there on their own. We had just begun to dip a toe in what was then the World Wide Web. It was very new to everybody, but we started understanding, kind of the potential that was there as it became eventually the internet. And we were building, sort of those early generation of what today is called a content management system, which is, or CMS. And we were making that stuff up back then. And we had just really a great, talented team, had a lot of good energy. We were hit a very successful formula in terms of branding. And then somewhere along the way, we started saying, well, what else can we do? What other things are out
Mm,
there? And we had launched the American Discovery Trail Initiative. We'd gotten National Trails Day off the ground, so we'd done consumer awareness events. We had done products, and then we started looking at television, and we were like, we don't really see anything out there that appeals to our particular approach to the outdoors, which was non-consumptive. It was under your own power. It was not hunting and fishing, probably is the key thing.
hmm
Somewhere along the line, this is an interesting part of the Trailside story. At an outdoor industry trade show, there's a big trade show every year out in Salt Lake, and I would regularly go out there because a lot of our manufacturers and outdoor industry generally meets there every year. It's the big one. And along comes a guy named Stephen Samuels who had this idea. He was a television producer, had no experience in the outdoors. He had this idea for an outdoor cooking show.
hmm
And the name he had, which he was very excited about, was Trailside Chef. And he was all excited and trying to get Backpacker excited about it, and trying to again come in on it with him as a help him produce this. And and his picture at the time of what would have been the host was, very likable looking individual, sitting down next to this big campfire, oversized campfire, and he had this monster, cast iron frying pan that had to be like 2 feet in diameter across or more. It would have been enough to feed, a small army of people. And he was there cooking away, smiling, and his, the idea for the show was, yeah, this is how you do the outdoors. You're going to take a monster frying pan, all the fixings and trappings, and maybe, you know, kill a moose along the way. I don't know, and cook it up, and then they're going to tell you how to cook it. And I said, well, Steve, I hate to tell you, you got part of this thing right, but you got to get rid of, you know, you got to get rid of the chef. You got to get rid of the food because, in the outdoors is the way I understood it.
hmm
And the team we had assembled at Backpacker, food was important, but it was kind of wasn't the point. You weren't going to the outdoors to have food. You were going to the outdoors to enjoy the outdoors and
hmm
experience all that entailed. So if Backpacker was going to put its name on the show, that was the first step with the executive producer that I eventually became very fond of working with. I said, Steve, you just got to get rid of the chef. And yeah, I think we can make this work.
Okay, so he has this vision of who the host is. How does that vision of who the host is become you?
The story keeps getting more interesting. So as we looked at it, we said, well, here's a group that really clearly understands how to produce, films and television series. But, they're basically Connecticut based at the time and essentially the New York community of production types who really don't, their world is a very urban world. And just by evidence of how they were thinking of this show initially. And we were concerned at Backpacker that, if we're going to be involved with this and go in as a partner with our brand attached to it, then we had to make sure we protected our brand, which meant making sure the show was credible with the outdoor community, as opposed to sort of what they describe as Hollywood's view of the outdoors. And the best way to do that was to control the guy in front of the camera. In other words, they couldn't get the host or the show to do anything that the host wasn't comfortable doing. So controlling the guy in front of the camera meant we
Hmm.
had to have our guy in front of the camera.
Hmm.
So, then we're looking around the room and it was like everybody else in the room on my team stepped backwards and they said, "Guess what, John? You're going to be the guy." That's kind of not exactly how it worked, but it was pretty obvious that, you know, it seemed like I was going to, this was where I was going to go next. So basically at that point I just said, okay, I'll jump in with both feet here, and I had to figure out how to make it work. And so then I'll let you take it from there.
Well, that's great because I mean, obviously, you didn't have the background in front of the camera, but they just decided that you were likable enough to be on camera.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was yet to be proven, but yeah, let's go with that. So
Okay, well, let's say they had good instincts then.
yeah, I was trainable. Let me just say it that way.
Because the appeal of the show, I mean, you've got a list of the questions that I sent you. The appeal of the show comes from its the combination of instruction and location. You know, the location drew you in. You know, these amazing places in the wilderness, and then the instruction was to show you how. I mean, who this is multi-part. So, I mean, who developed that concept? You know, and what was your involvement in that? Because the quote I think you said in one of the post show rundowns was that you wanted to create a television show that ensures that you watch less television. I mean, do you remember that? And do you remember how this underlying theme and concept started and who it was who developed it?
Yeah, again, I think it was an evolutionary concept, but I think there were some basic things that held from the very beginning. I mean, again, as far as I was concerned, it started with Steve Samuels, and the way he had originally framed the show, which was, it was to be a how-to show. Now he wanted to
Okay.
make it a how-to show about cooking, and somewhere along the way he started, he was very good at adapting, and he understood strategically it was important to have backpackers endorsement to make it really fly. And there were lots of other things associated with that, but in short, we morphed it to make your own adventure, and that really became the mantra for the series. That the idea that you're going to watch less television was really kind of more of a cute marketing
Hmm.
slogan, more probably to kind of catch the attention of the PBS programming audience, and some of the professionals in the industry kind of like, oh, this is different, you know and it kind of immediately gives you a little bit of a chuckle kind of thing. But the idea was really to present the outdoors as accessible, eminently doable, um, in very real terms. The idea was, well, we'll let you tag along and show you how to do it. And again, that was really an extension of our focus with Backpacker Magazine, books, and online. So in that sense, we were just taking a very successful formula in print and event and soon digital, and extending it into broadcast. So
PBS is, I mean, it seems like a natural home for a show like this. But why PBS? Because, I'm assuming there were other people also interested.
well, PBS was really always we liked the company we were keeping within a PBS network. PBS is educational programming.
Yeah.
PBS is non-commercial, and that doesn't mean we didn't have to be a little bit commercial. If you watch the series, you can clearly see, that there's sponsors, products being shown, and that sort of thing. And then we were very careful about knowing where the lines are on underwriter involvement with programming and all that sort of thing. And we worked very closely with PBS on that. But we liked the non-commercial nature of it. That gave us kind of free reign to do the kind of show we wanted to do. And so I think PBS was a great fit, and I think it still would be.
It's not reality television. It's more gentle, and you can see that with a lot of PBS programming. You've got this show. You've come up with a format. You want it to be educational. Backpacking magazine traditionally deals with hiking, but the show doesn't deal with hiking. It deals with a variety of concepts. How did you decide on what to look at and what the locations would be?
Well, it wasn't necessarily okay, here, let's go over here to the magic orb and it's going to give us our next show or our next location.
Hmm.
Um, the ideas from the show came from all over. I mean, some from group brainstorms, among the production staff and the team. Others came from the editorial staff at Backpacker Magazine. A lot of them came from the editorial staff. Others from just having our ears to the ground while planning our shows. And like many powerful notions, it was this above all was a result of, I guess, channeling many voices in the room and a great team effort. So, I wouldn't. It's kind of hard. It's like, anything to do with the creative process. Where'd you get that idea from? You know, it comes from a lot of things: your past, your present, what you just saw flying by in the walk you had at lunch, and that kind of thing. So.
I mean, I'm looking over the season one schedule, and the list of shows and how they were at least broadcast wasn't the way they were produced, was it? They were often in different orders altogether.
You mean in terms of the schedule or the calendar of the
I
season?
think I saw, and I might be wrong here. I thought I saw that Backpacking Tennessee was actually the first one that was actually shot, but it's not the first one in that was actually broadcast.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the broadcast sequence really didn't have a lot to do with how they lined up over the course of a production year.
Hmm.
Um, you kind of look at your lineup of shows, and you've got your, I don't know, you got a canoeing show, and you might want to follow that with a climbing show, and then you might want to wait till the end of the season when you're closer to winter, and then you do a mountaineering show. So when you would actually have to be on location to film those could be completely different from when they were going to broadcast, because they could be easily a year apart in terms of when you are on location versus when they actually were best to be broadcast. So and then there were a lot of logistical issues. Just there's just a whole lot of details that go into. Okay, here's a great idea for a show. Wouldn't that be
Sure.
great? And then all the yeah buts come in, and the reality of expenses to get a crew out there. Or could you get a crew out there?
Mm.
Or some of our shows were very challenging from a, you have to think of the technology being used back then, which, the cameras we were using, for instance, they were beta cameras, which,
Mm.
a lot of people, a lot of people today don't even know, barely remember what VHS is like, much less beta. But beta was sort of like high-end VHS tape that you'd use for, quality work like this, but it was tape, and you had cameras that were big and that had big batteries on them, and you had to work with batteries. And so, if you're on location for 5 or 6 days, you have to figure out how we're going to recharge our batteries. And so, oh, and by the way, you're in the San Juan Mountains, so and you're up at altitude, so somehow you got to get hey, a generator up there at your base camp, so at night you can come back and charge the batteries up. And oh, you got to get gas up there, and so it was crews that we had to schlep gear up there. I mean, literally, it was a toboggan with with a generator on it. And then at some point it got onto somebody's back and got schlepped up the last mile or so. So yeah, there were some major challenges that way, and that sometimes could kill a production, a great location or a show idea. Just when you look at it and say, yeah, we just can't figure that one out.
I think you answered the question in that. How long did it take to produce the show from beginning to end? So you were on location for about 5 or 6 days.
Yeah, we typically, I would say, typically, again, depending on the show and you know all the all the issues of a particular location, but we typically would allocate about 5 days to a week on location, filming each episode. But there was a lot of work done in the lead up to the location. There was tons of advanced legwork. There were, huge logistical issues to resolve depending on the location, how remote it was, again, batteries, safety concerns. Are we going to be on a climbing show? We got to have extra people because we got to be double sure on equipment. And I can tell you a few stories about that. Weather. What if the weather goes
Mm.
south on us? I mean, but perhaps the most complicated aspect of the show was that by design, the format of the show was to bring it back from location. So it really required a minimal amount of post production
Hmm.
editing. And, by that, I mean, if you watch closely, you'll notice much of the show would be long, uncut segments,
Yes.
which means that you have to spend a lot of time on location planning out your shots, the dialogue, the camera movements, how you're going to record the sound. And praying the host gets his lines right, big challenge. And because the locations were so unique and remote, if we missed something while we were out there, we couldn't go back and get it later on. So you had to work with whatever you captured on the set and location. So
You had it pretty well storyboarded and set out before you ever set foot in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, I mean they storyboarded it. Again, most people may not be familiar with the what that means. I mean, you generally had an outline of, um, you know, okay, we're going to start the trip here. We're going to take a few minutes for John to turn to camera and kind of let people know where we are, why we're going here, what we're going to hopefully see, et cetera, et cetera. Then we might cut and then break to a scene where we show the map, and maybe we might integrate
Mm.
all of that together. And then as we move along, if we've pre-scouted the trip, which a lot of times we would send somebody actually out a month or two ahead of time if we could afford it to actually you know go along the whatever path we were planning to go on and anticipate, okay, this is a good scenic overview, we think we can do this kind of a segment here or there. But as you know, on any outdoor trip, things don't always go as planned, so there was a lot of improv.
I bet there was, but some of those long shots that you used to do at the beginnings, I mean, I look at them now and I think you were just asking for trouble. I mean, anything could have gone wrong. You've got somebody in the far distance riding up or kayaking in or skiing in. All you need is one bad line and that's it. Take two, go back to the start.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and not many people have heard this, but again, you go back to, I had no clue what I was doing as somebody in front of a camera and walking and talking and skiing or canoeing at the same time, and working with a cameraman, sound man, you know, and also, by the way, memorizing my lines. So, I'm looking around for, okay, if I'm going to do this, I better get better at it because, a lot of people are depending on me to get this right. So, by way of training myself, actually, it might surprise people, maybe not. One of my role models was a guy named Bob Vila on This Old House.
I was thinking of this old house when you started talking about
Yeah,
format and presentation.
it's not because I particularly liked him. In fact, it was more because he really had mastered the art of the uncut segment. If you
Hmm.
watch some of his early episodes, you'll see, if you're really watching, that he had ridiculously long uncut segments that involved working with a guest, wandering through multiple rooms of a house, indoors, outdoors, all the while being aware of where the camera was and is, so the viewer can see and hear what's going on. I mean, quite honestly, I was astounded. At one point, one of his longer cuts came in at 18 minutes.
Wow.
And, anybody in the business knows that that's pretty much beyond human. But at the same time, it wasn't like he never had flubs or anything. It's just he kept rolling right through them. So it made some really compelling programming, having the does and the flubs in there. And plus, it greatly reduced, above all, for the production company, it greatly reduced the post production expenses of the
Hmm.
series. But, it put an inordinate amount of pressure on the crew to script out the moves,
Sure.
make sure to choreograph things to avoid interruptions. And by the way, I'm by no means saying that I was in Bob Vila's league, but he was a good teacher for me as a total novice to being a television host. So, and I have to add quickly here that, we also had some amazing technicians on the show, particularly our cameraman, Jeff Wayman, and sound man, Michael Lonsdale, who, by the way, gave me the nickname Lucky 13, among others. And second camera work, we had guys like Steve Howe, who was the Southwest editor for Backpacker, who adapted the video work. He'd be in like scuba gear under the canoes and stuff getting shots. And Steve White was another crew member. There was great team back in the at headquarters with Steve Samuels, the executive producer, Matt Cohen as supervising producer. We had a host of great directors. Dave Getchell, the equipment editor at Backpacker Magazine, Daryl Zucra, Nan Mandez. You interviewed her, I believe.
Hmm.
I'm sure I'm missing a lot of people's, but so I apologize if I missed anyone. But we all had critical roles to play. We knew what we had to do, and we got it done. And it was a magical group and really a magical time. So,
Well, I wanted to talk about how many people, but I don't think I can go past the lucky 13. What's that all to do with?
well, I was going to tell you that usually everything I did to camera was once and done, and we just moved on to the next scene. But I'd be completely false in that statement. Um,
No, go ahead.
yeah, when I did those segments where I turned to camera, I insisted. I was a journalist by nature, so and again, I wanted to really pack information into what I said, not just say anything frivolous.
Hmm.
So I pretty much insisted on writing my own script and had to commit my lines to memory, which that's how I came into my nickname Lucky 13, because you know it was actually Michael Lonsdale, the sound man, because they'd kind of set up and they knew, nah, he's not going to do it. It's at 13 he might hit it, and then they call him Lucky 13. So sometimes, yeah, it was 13 takes, more takes. And when we had other things involved, like we did a caving show where we had one of the cavers, was a guest, kind of rappel down into the middle of my
I
walk
saw
and talk.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was ridiculous, because I for the life of me, I could not get his name right, and every time he came down the rope, I would be half laughing because it was so goofy. And I don't know how many takes that one took. It took a long time.
Well, I saw you get whacked in the head with a paddle and won, and you were the consummate professional there. You just kept on ticking.
Yeah, I did. I did. There was a time when I used to feel apologetic for flubbing my lines and costing the crew so much effort. And somewhere early on, one of the crew, it was probably Michael Lonsdale, pulled me aside and just said, "Look, John, relax. Even the best guys in the business, they don't do these lengthy takes. They refuse to do them." And as I began to get more attuned to noticing that when I look at television shows and
Mm.
movies, I realized that he was exactly right. I mean, the average uncut take in any major series is very, very brief, maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and that's usually a long one. And I was being asked to jump in cold and go for uncut to cameras while skiing or paddling or climbing, or for 1 or even 4 minutes at a pop. So,
Oh, they were so long.
yeah, one shot I even had a grizzly bear bouncing around, chewing on salmon over my shoulder, which was really ridiculous because,
I will get to that because I want to talk about that one, but go
yeah.
on.
Well, that was just an example of like I'm literally hearing this grizzly splashing water right because we used a very wide angle lens on the
Hmm.
shoot or on the show as part of the format, and so in the shot it looks like that grizzly is like 100 feet back, and in fact he was like about 25 feet back. So it was a little unnerving. That was definitely, I did not go lucky 13 on that one.
I think any scene where you can see the grizzly bear's eyes is probably too close.
Yeah, that was a little close, but they were. The good news is we were up there in a time of year where the salmon were like running so thick you could pretty much almost walk across the streams on the backs of some of the silvers, and there was blueberries out, so the grizzly were all very well distracted and very well fed. So, and they didn't know what we were all about. We looked, that we were in a part of the Katmai that very few humans ever go. So.
Hmm. I do want to talk a little bit. I mean, I don't want to spoil the magic of the show too much because but it was designed to make it seem like it was an intimate meeting between friends. You, your guest, and the audience. I mean, how many people were there on a shoot? How big was the crew? And I imagine those overnight camps were quite a challenge logistically.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was most of the shows we pretty much did the trips. There was some where it just, if you're doing a caving show, you come back up in the daylight if you're going to stay at a comfortable place at night and come back down in the next day. But most of those other shows were, we're on location, we're on for days on end, and so we're traveling as a team, and the guests, how did we come across them? Were they, a lot of them were people I knew. I knew either professionally or I were personal friends. And As far as the crew size, we probably had a core, probably never went lower than, I trying to think here, about 6 people.
Okay.
Might have been six or seven, might have been the smallest number. Again, a lot of this is location dependent because if we had to pack in all our own food and everything else, sometimes we'd have an outfitter involved, just because you're working sun up to, well, even before sun up, you're up and out and getting to locations to move to the next camp or whatever, and then you're shooting 12 hours or as long as you've got daylight. And coming into camp, it was one of those nice perks where if we had an outfitter along, he or she would take care of getting camp sort of set up, and certainly getting taking care of dinner. So we had some help that way. But some locations, sitting on Mount Rainier, we didn't have an outfitter. We had we had to do our own stuff. So.
You often would end the episode with like, and this is day whatever, and tomorrow we're going off into the distance and we're going to do this. Did that actually happen? Did you complete the trips, and did you get a chance to really enjoy the ride, or was it just? I mean, from what you've described, it was all go all the time, right?
I mean, there were certainly moments in the over the years of doing it where there you definitely felt like this is work. I just traded my four walls of an office for a great backdrop,
Yeah.
but it's work, and you're working with a team. It's the they're getting paid by the day or the hour, and you've got to get up and do your job. And some days you're sore, some days you're hurt, some days you just came from the hospital and you're back on location with stitches. You know, um, that kind of things, and you just had to, you know, for lack of a better word, you have to suck it up and go.
Hmm.
But no, there were plenty of moments. With each episode, there were always magical moments and the chance to enjoy it. And I absolutely, every trip, there wasn't one bad trip in there. There wasn't a show that I don't have a great memory of. And but did I stay on for another week and hang out and enjoy it.
It would often be like, I remember watching some of them would be like, well, we've camped tonight and tomorrow we're off into the distance, but this is where the show ends. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a
That's
certain
a
amount of
creative license there, or?
yeah, there's a little bit of showmanship in there. I mean, I you got to remember, I had a more than full time day job as editor and publisher of Backpacker magazine. So, as soon as I got done on location, I was back in my office in Pennsylvania or wherever whichever one of the offices was going to need to be at
Hmm.
for the magazine. And so I didn't have a lot of extra time generally to hang out. But so having the trip was my time. So
I've said here that you represented to some degree the everyman, but you did have these amazing hosts. Some of them Olympic standard hosts. Now you briefly mentioned that some of these people you knew professionally, but how did it feel to be on camera with some of those experts? I remember watching
oh
a scene
yeah.
with a telemark skiing and thinking, "Oh man, you're having a rough day today." And riding the rapids in Oregon, and how much did you actually learn, and did that translate to your interests? Off of the show, because you said in one you had never been caving before.
No, actually, no. Caving was definitely something new to me. Certainly the kind of caving we were doing there, and then on future shows, I've done some additional caving. The good news is about caving is, you sort of know if you're going to be able to relax in there within
Mm.
about, I think when you're about, 100 feet into a cave, you pretty much know, that you're either going to be able to make it or you're not.
Yeah, if you've got claustrophobia or you don't like your arms pinned, that's not a good recipe.
Yeah, plus the darkness, I mean, what you're seeing in the shows we did was, we were lighting that thing up so that
Hmm.
people could see it, but otherwise, the only light you have is what's on your headlamp, and that's a really disorienting kind of experience. So the caving thing was, yeah, that was new, but I always learned something, even when I had a lot of experience,
Hmm.
even when sometimes I might have felt like I was. Maybe more experienced than even some of the guests we'd have on in certain areas, and I kind of coach it along a little bit,
Sure.
but it was my job to let the guest expert be the expert,
Hmm.
and I was very, very conscious of that. Um, one you talk about Olympic caliber. I think you're referring to the guests I had on one of the whitewater
Yes.
kayaking shows. I think it was its name was it Lecky Haller. I think it was his name. Anyway, I may have the name wrong, and I apologize. That was amazing because we did a little scene kind of off from the trip up at their. We went up to their training facility on the Nantahala River, and where we had the Olympic gates. And I'd never done any kind of that. That was definitely a little bit past my expertise to be able to do that kind of fast maneuvering in a rapid and get through gates. And you're also in an Olympic boat, which is these very low profile, just you know you almost have to shoehorn your way into them. And we were in a what they call a C2, which is a two-man canoe, but these are Olympic canoes, so
Hmm.
they're like kayaks, even lower profile than many kayaks because you're actually kneeling. You don't have to have room to get your feet out in front of you, and you're offset. Anyway, long story short, that was one of my George Plimpton moments where I was running gates with Lecky Holler over my shoulder, who had been a gold medalist,
Hmm.
so I could do anything because I knew he could pull us out of
Oh, okay.
it. So I was up there, just having a gas because I knew there's no way we're not going over. And a couple times we almost did, and I just felt like this monstrous yank coming from behind me as
Hmm.
he bailed us out of yet another, you know, another trashing from going over. But it was great. It was great.
Do you have a guest that you really look back fondly on and think that was the guy that I really enjoyed speaking to the most?
Oh, there was so many, honestly, and I'm not exaggerating. They all had their special features, and you spend a lot of time with them, and when
Hmm.
your cameras aren't rolling, you're getting to know them very well. I had many. people that I had um, known before they came on the show and had experiences with. I had my daughter's on,
I saw that
so
one. Yeah.
yeah, that was wonderful, just to have her participate, and that was sort of my version of take your daughter to work day,
Hmm.
and she had fun, and uh, it was. I had her actually on a couple episodes over the years, but so I probably would start there. But other people. I had my brother on. Tommy, who's now deceased, and so Tommy was my brother. Tommy was our guest on one of the shows we did for Trailside. Was a Voyager canoeing show
Hmm.
out in Lake Superior, and then canoe trip in the Boundary Waters. That involved the Grand Portage, and so anyway, that was a real fun one to have Tommy there, and he's just a great guy. Another great show, great guest. I mean, there's a bunch of them. Ken Fink uh, from Maine, sea kayaker. He basically is the guy who introduced not just sea kayaking to the United States, but he also introduced me to sea kayaking. So that was great having Ken on as our guest years later.
Hmm.
Steve Landig, we did this amazing trip on the Mississauga River up in Ontario, and Steve is an incredible story. He's probably one of those most understated guys who deserves to not be understated. He had done it, and when I was editor of Canoe Magazine, I uh, helped set up the trip and then covered it from beginning to end. He did a 28,000-mile canoe trip, and it's just an amazing odyssey. And then to circle back with Steve, then I don't know what it was, 15 years later or something.
Hmm.
Um, after he completed this major adventure, never before done kind of thing, set so many records, it's off the charts. And then we went on with our lives and hadn't, suddenly I needed a guest for the show, and I'm thinking who
Hmm.
could go, and I called up Steve and said, yeah, that sounds fun. So I hadn't caught up with him, and without going on too much, we had a great time, traveling through the Canadian bush together and
Hmm.
sharing a canoe. And at one point, you don't see this in the show, but it was rainy. I mean, it's just we got hit with so much rain, we just we couldn't move. We couldn't film anything, and had to wait it out. And finally, we get moving again, and we're somewhere along the way, we're going on one of many portages on that trip, and Steve and I are carrying our own gear, and we're off sort of from the group by now, and because it's about a 3-mile hike through some really thick bush, and it's not an even trail, and it's been raining, and it's wet and slippery, and we're literally going along flipping and falling, and having a good time and trying to fight off the bugs. And finally we start saying, let's, any songs? And Steve says, yeah, I know one. He starts singing the Barney theme song. And I realized, and I started singing along right with him. And I realized we both know every word to the Barney theme song. Oh my God, his life changed.
Well, you had
So
kids that age, didn't you?
yeah, we had both had kids, and that's where we were in life. And you realize, wow, that's you never would have seen this coming 15 years ago, where we're out in the Canadian bush, singing Barney the theme song, and we started laughing so hard we were rolling down laughing we couldn't even walk. It was funny. So anyway, it was some great moments.
Well, some of those hosts, some of those guests, I should say, I mean, they're not experienced on camera either. I don't really remember any one of them being a dead fish. They came across great on camera just the same.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. I mean, I think the producers of the show, they usually did a little bit of advance, legwork to, try to get the prospective guests to do a little video on their own just to see if they could hold their own and that kind of thing. So they didn't necessarily walk on cold, but um, for the most part, it was my job to, get them to shine. And
Hmm.
and if they were having difficulties, there was coaching. And but really most of these guys most most of these guests, I shouldn't say guys, they knew their subject. It was
Hmm.
comfortable for them, and they were talking about things that they knew very well. So.
We've covered a little bit about your personal experience on the show. We've kind of been weaving it in and out, and so it's not really a segue. But what was your favorite episode? Do you have one?
Well, it's funny. When I was doing the show, the series, and I was also doing a lot of public speaking and promoting the series, and whether it be you know, Boy Scouts assembly for Eagle Scout badges, or outdoor industry gatherings, people that question would come up,
Hmm.
and
Everybody wants to know.
everybody wants to know. And then my answer was always the same. It was, my favorite location is the next one, and
Really?
that's very true. I mean, but certainly there were some that were I was particularly fond of, and some of the episodes. I think I'm always going to love going to the Boundary Waters. There's just that's just a magical place. The coast of Maine, which of course is where my home is these days,
Hmm.
is a magical draw as well. Um, New Zealand is, I should,
Yeah, the Milford track looked amazing.
yeah, that should be on everybody's bucket list. I did some mountaineering in New Zealand as well on my other series, and it's just an amazing place. Love that place. I've done Australia, uh, Belize. We did again. That was a any place wild location.
Hmm.
Um, but it's really hard to single anyone out. Sometimes it gets down to, well, give me a activity like my favorite
Sure.
mountaineering show, my favorite, that kind of thing.
So, what was the most challenging episode? I asked some people to send me some questions, and one of these came up where they wanted to know what was the most challenging, which makes me think of something that Nan said about you being sick during the Baja.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, yeah. There's different kinds of when you use the word challenging. I
Well, there's production and there's personal, I suppose.
there's challenging, and then in the physical sense, there's challenging in the sense of unforeseen situations like accidents, or I got sick. And yeah, I definitely was sick on a number of shows, and I had to learn very quickly, especially after that first time. I think what it was I got a bug somewhere. I'd come straight from Glacier National Park, where I was spending the night in snow caves that we had carved out in the Glacier National Park. So I was in like sub-zero weather, and then immediately getting off a plane, and suddenly I'm at 100-degree weather, on the coast of Baja. And, you know, one of the crew, I think, had a cold going, and, it was one of those kind of deals. And whatever it was, it just cooked, and I was delirious. I remember having to get taken off in a boat, and going to the local VA, what the equivalent of a VA hospital is.
Hmm.
And that was very difficult. And we had to cancel the shoot and pack everybody up and go home, because I was in such bad shape that
Wow.
I could barely get back on the plane to go home. I can't remember what they shot into me for antibiotics, but it worked. It got me home. I don't think it's legal in the United States, but it got me
Mm.
home.
I think the way Nan described it was a lot funnier. It sounds a lot more serious the way you say it.
Well, yeah, I remember uh, coming down with it once. It was a day or two out on that. We were kind of doing the show around an island camp off the coast of Baja, right off La Paz, and I just remember, I'm feeling a little crappy, and waking up, and I'm like, oh, I'm really bad. And then, by the next day, I couldn't even get out of the tent, and of course, you're baking out there in the desert
Mm.
sun, and I had 103, 106 fever going all day long, and by about the third day, it was just I wasn't even able to get out of my tent pretty much, and that's when they called a rescue boat to come in and get me out. So it was pretty rough. It was a
I,
pretty rough moment.
I bet it was.
I mean, I've had other shows where I was remember being down in the Exumas, and doing a sea kayaking show, and you'll notice somewhere in the show I'm suddenly wearing a white glove on my hand.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason is I had to get my hand stitched up at one of these island clinics out there because I was in the boat standing up at one point, and then I a wave or something hit it, and I slipped, and I went to grab myself coming down, and I brought my hand down right through a cleat,
Oh, wow.
and it pierced the palm of my hand pretty good. So I ended up with about 6 stitches, and went back the next day and just put a glove on it and finished the show, kind of thing. So there's a lot of that going on.
I bet. And what production wise was the most challenging? Because you said that you had to, you probably had ideas that were scrapped because production would have been just too difficult. What was probably the most challenging production in terms of logistics?
That's a good question. Um,
I mean, I look at that caving episode and, that's one. I mean, a lot of them, to be honest with you. The caving episode was certainly something. Um, some of those mountain climbs as well. I mean, you're not exactly dealing with the most hospitable of conditions.
Yeah, the mountaineering shows were very challenging, of course, because you have some serious objective risk out there. There's some serious safety issues, so we were very, very careful about that. And we always erred on the side of caution.
Hmm.
So, and you particularly when you're dealing not just with me as the host, but the cameraman and sound man. When we're filming and we're walking and talking, and
They're going
how
backwards holding the camera.
yeah, they're going backwards holding the camera. I'm sometimes going backwards on rappel, and that's happened where I've suddenly found out my rope wasn't where my rope was supposed to be, and that kind of thing. So you got to have extra people there to kind of just be to the right and left of off camera, and be ready to jump in and say, "Whoa, stop! Don't take another step," kind of thing. So so we were very careful about that. The Rainier shoot went pretty smoothly, actually,
Hmm.
but there were some issues. Actually, one of our crew ended up in the mountaineering world. They had to be bagged, which means we were going up the mountain, and he clearly was struggling. And so we basically just wrapped him in a couple sleeping bags and said, "We'll be right back down for you. Just park yourself here in this, safe little nook, and we'll be back down in about 4 hours." And we had situations like that that
Okay.
you just kind of you work with, and you do the smart call and try not to push anybody beyond their limit. So
Well, because there's human safety, but there's also just getting the shot. I mean, some of the camera angles in that you went to great detail to get those camera angles.
no, you're absolutely right. The and a lot of that is again, the skill of the cameraman. Jeff Wayman was one of the principal cameramen on this series. And then we had second cameramen some involved many times. Would be Steve Howe and Steve White. And you got to remember, this is back in the early 90s.
Hmm.
GoPros didn't exist. They were essentially a dream.
Yeah, I want to talk
And
about that later. So,
yeah,
but
and the
yeah.
camera, we weren't using a steady cam. That was all handheld by Jeff, and we called him the human steady cam, actually, because of it. He would have a way of getting it done, and he was a very athletic guy, and had a really great eye, and obviously great skill with a camera. And then we had some other tricks in there too, how to record sound. We had to hide the microphones sometimes, most of the time,
Hmm.
and then we'd use a boom mic occasionally. And so there was lots of things that we were inventing, rigs that we were inventing. If we're doing a shot in the Everglades where we need to get something up above, Barty and me in solo canoes, how are we going to get that shot? Well, okay, let's see. We'll take a couple canoes, we'll strap them together, we'll do a platform between them, we'll get a ladder. And this is in the middle of the Everglades, mind you, that we had to get all this stuff together.
I saw
And
that ladder on that canoe. That was
oh,
that was
did they
something.
show that somewhere? Okay.
Yeah, it was in one of them. I'm not sure that would have passed any OSHA standards.
No, no, we were definitely outside the realm. But we had we had people involved that were just really good at what they did, and again, it's kind of amazing who came together for that series and their backgrounds. One
There's a
of
lot
our
of passion
guys,
in the show, and you can see that.
yeah, one of our guys was actually involved with a couple of them were involved with ABC American Sportsman back in the day, and these were the guys that were doing things like that classic ski slalom shot where they the agony of defeat where somebody goes tumbling down a ski
Hmm.
slope trying to do a slalom course. um, well, part of the back story on some of that is there's some footage in there of simulating somebody going through the gates of a slalom course. Well, that was done by one of our guys back in the early days. He was strapped to a harness hanging from a helicopter with his camera in hand going through those gates. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff you just did back then to get the shot. But it was, yeah, it was definitely like, oh, don't try this at home.
Well, you see that today as well. I hate to say it, with those people taking selfies in the most inopportune places, always to get the shot. But um, one of the questions that was sent to me was, they say, what was the creepiest or scariest incident, especially in the backcountry? Now, I think of the bears, I think of the grizzlies, and I look at that and I think, you're saying respect the bears and know your environment, and you're facing the camera, and there's this big grizzly bear in the distance, which doesn't seem particularly safe. What were some of the scariest and creepiest things you came across?
Well, actually, that show is a good example of actually we were relatively safe.
Hmm.
I mean, because we had done our homework, we knew the time of year, we knew when the bears would be fed. I mean, we saw I don't know how many grizzly bear in the span of that was I think about a seven day shoot, 5 or 7 day shoot where we were up on the Katmai, and yeah, they were everywhere. And even at night um, a creepy moment, I guess. It was certainly, you know, a come to Jesus moment in some ways, but we had our tents pitched. You kind of there's down in the coastal areas of the Katmai coast. There's sort of grassy areas, and the only trails through there are where the grass is tamped down from essentially the grizzly coming back and forth to feed at night or to feed any time of day, really. Um, but so you kind of just find a flat spot just off one of those grassy trails, put your tent up. And so, I'm sitting there, I'm in my own tent, and somewhere in the middle of the night, I'm literally hearing the ground, feeling the ground shaking. And of course, it's a grizzly bear coming for a midnight snack, which is down about a couple hundred yards from where that's where the stream was from where our
Hmm.
tents were. And you're sitting there in your tent going, oh man, keep going, keep going. And he stopped. I don't know if it was a male or a female. It probably was a young male.
Hmm.
Stopped, sniffed. But they've never seen people. Most of the grizzly up there, they've never seen human forms of any kind. And so they're in many cases uh, they're going to be as afraid of you as you are of them.
Sure.
But you don't want to do anything. That said, you don't want to do anything to provoke them. But anyway, he did keep walking by, and I was just kind of like, okay, and I didn't feel necessarily unsafe up until you're sitting that close to where you can smell a grizzly bear, and you can usually smell a grizzly if they've been in the area, particularly up in that part of Alaska where there's a lot of brush.
Hmm.
um, they smell so bad that if it's not too windy and they've been
Mm.
in the environment you're in say the last hour or so, there's usually a stink that permeates. It's kind of like if you've ever you know walked into a room and somebody's just been in there with perfume, a
Hmm.
lot of perfume on or something, and you're like, whoa, okay. So it's a creepy feeling when you're going through a lot of that brush, especially alders and stuff, because they like to catch their food in there, and they'll literally kill something,
Hmm.
um, then cover it up and then plan to be, coming back for it. So whenever you kind of smell something rotting somewhere, that you can assume it's not a recent grizzly
Hmm.
passing, because they're covered in all sorts of uh, blood and guts from whatever they've just killed. But anyway, if you come across something that looks like it's covered up and it's a kill, get the heck away from there, because you don't want to be between a grizzly and its food.
They create their own caches, eh?
Yeah, which is something I wasn't aware of until I had taken that trip. But they're, they'll kind of, oh, great, I got something for later on. Now let's keep going, keep hunting. I still got some energy left. I'll come back and get this one later on.
Okay, so there's
And
no picnic baskets involved because that until I got to America, that was really my only extent of these.
no, no, I think that's only in Jellystone that happens. So,
Okay.
um, but yeah, no, the grizzly thing is, it's being smart. It's about, don't get if you see a mother and her cubs, don't get anywhere near that, because that, if she feels you're threatening her cubs, you're in trouble. You want to be conscious of which way the wind is blowing. And you don't ever want to come up behind, you know, on the wrong side of the, or upwind from a grizzly, or I guess it would be downwind from a
Mm.
grizzly. You want to make sure they can smell you coming. And
Yeah.
and typically, if they see you, we had a couple that, we were hanging out filming a segment, and right near a edge of a stream that curved and bended and twisted, and around the bend comes, we nicknamed them after a while. Some of these bears, we saw them so often. We called these guys the Trouble Brothers. They were a
Hmm.
couple young males, and they came around the corner and poked their heads up and saw us, and immediately just like put their tails between their legs and went running, the other direction. So they don't know what you are, and if you don't behave like, something that they've seen before, they're probably going to try to avoid you. At least that time of year.
That's good because a lot of the old 8 millimeter film I've seen from Americans' national parks has people treating bears a little bit too closely with feed and things like that. So it's
Oh
good to
no.
know that there's
Yeah.
no chance of any sort of human interaction that could end up in you getting severely injured or dead.
Yeah, the dumbest thing and the worst thing you can do for any wild animal is feed them, you know.
One of the things that worries me is not the bears, and certainly you kind of came across this a little bit when you were doing the Milford track. Is um, the what worries me more in America is things like Lyme disease, Giardia, more of the microscopic type of illnesses. And when you were talking about being on the Milford track, I think the only poisonous or the only venomous animal in New Zealand is a relative of the redback spider. So I can imagine that would have been massively easier in terms of worry than, let's say, being in somewhere like bear country or even somewhere where you have to deal with ticks and Lyme disease or snakes.
Yeah, I mean the Milford track is just so, it's just such a nice hike, and it's so well maintained, and and there's, yeah, you're right. There's nothing scary over there that I was aware of, other than Kia birds. They can be kind of annoying. Um, but are they the one? They're the big parrots, right?
Well, I'm not a Kiwi,
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm an Australian. We have a lot more dangerous creatures.
Okay.
So
Well, I have done some in Australia. I've been out in that neck of the woods, so been sea kayaking off the coast and by Tasmania, and then when it was over in the Perth area, in
that's where I'm from, Perth.
canyoneering down there, that was a great trip. That was another great one.
I would have loved to have seen you do a show on the Biberman track or something like that because that's modeled on the AT, and that
Yep.
actually that takes me to my next thing. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I enjoyed on the show, and one of the ones that really drew me in because I mean I didn't come to the show from the '90s. I was actually starting to work in the Everglades, and I was collecting trail tapes because I had planned to do the Pacific Crest Trail, but I had to put it on hold because life gets in the way. And I came across the AT, the double episode, and that was one of the ones that I still think is one of my favorites because
Yeah.
it was well, one, you convinced a bunch of people to carry an extra 5 pounds, which I think is incredible for people who cut the tags out of their shirts and ends off their toothbrushes. but
Yep.
also just how human it was. And I'd seen things like it in, let's say, 2008 productions, but never anything as far back as like the 90s. It just seemed to be groundbreaking. Can you talk a little bit about that show?
Yeah, that's actually a great one. Is really also one of my favorites. I think the concept on that is just so compelling. And it never, I don't think it had really been done before. Uh, but somewhere in our team, there was a couple people that came together on that idea. I think the director in particular, David Conover, was instrumental with that format, and really seemed to have a good handle on what he wanted to accomplish with it. And yeah, the stories, the people, I was so touched working with them and struck by, man, talk about willpower and, dealing with adversity. And, one of them, she's no longer with us, but her trail name was Maine Rose. You'll see in the beginning, she struggled to even figure out how to stuff her sleeping bag into a stuff sack.
She was
Yeah,
amazing,
yeah.
amazing. I've just been watching it this afternoon. Uh, I think you said of her that somebody had tagged her as not a typical through hiker, but she definitely had that intestinal fortitude.
Yeah, yeah, and you realize that the vast majority of the people that are hiking the AT are not your quote hardcore backpackers. These are people that are their motivations are come from all over, but they're just looking for that experience, and it's not necessarily because um, they have all the experience of the outdoors or anything. In fact, many of them are novices, and there's a fair high attrition rate
Mm.
very early on with the AT. But the people that come through, they're they really develop a very strong bond, and it's a rare thing.
It's a communal experience.
Yeah.
I often say that walking is the best cure for anything that ails you because you have enough time to work through the problems. I mean, that's why the Camino and other long distance trails are so popular. Um, you must have chosen a few people because you touched on it, the attrition rate. I mean, a lot of people read Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods and then didn't quite make it, just like Bryson didn't. So, how many people did you actually give cameras to?
I don't recall, but it was a fairly high success rate.
Yeah,
I think there was one guy that we were starting out with. I think he broke his um, he had a stress fracture or something, and
yeah,
I
I
think
saw that.
physically he just had to drop out. Um, there might have been one, maybe two others, but I think for the most part, the people we gave them to all did manage to get through. So I think it was an amazing. It might have had something to do with the interview process, the screening, and
Yeah.
all that, but for the most part, we were lucky.
That wasn't the only episode that I really enjoyed. I loved your mountain biking episodes because up until that point, I'd never ever done any bike packing, and yeah, I mean, I can thank you for leading me to do. I did the C to C in the UK, which is across the from Whitehaven through to not South Shields, but it's the other coast. And
Yep.
that was directly as a result of seeing some of the bike packing stuff because that was the other one I really enjoyed. I loved the mountain biking in Utah. I loved the one where you went through Big Bend. Uh, that was because it seemed to me you had such a varied schedule in terms of the type of content. The AT was really the major trail. You didn't touch on the Pacific Crest Trail or like the Discovery Trail. Is there any reason that you didn't do that? Because that would have directly linked you to backpacker.
Well, I think it was mostly we were trying to be a very broad, uh, have a very broad appeal as an outdoor show. So we were trying to always emphasize the the full breadth of outdoor experiences you can have without involving, you know, hunting or fishing kind of thing. Although we did do fly fishing shows, but they were always catch and release.
I noticed that. That's very different by American standards.
Yeah, it's becoming more common, and I'm very pleased that that seems to be a growing trend. But that's where the television medium becomes a little different from, say, the vertical magazine, the niche publishing kind of thing.
Hmm.
Television is a general audience kind of platform, and so I think we had to, in order to maintain the entertainment, quite frankly, the entertainment value and the variety that people expect when they turn on the television, that you just have to mix it up. And if yeah, every year or week after week, are people going to want to keep seeing another backpacking show?
True.
I think that was kind of had sort of had its an obvious answer.
So, what was the feedback like? Because I noticed you were nominated for a number of Emmys, and what was the feedback like with the show? Did you get a lot of mail and feedback from your viewing audience?
Yeah, we did. I mean, it was very gratifying. It really seemed to have we seemed to have struck a nerve, and it really the concept and the experience we were sharing really resonated with people. I always chuckled, because I wouldn't classify myself as being in any way full of myself.
Hmm.
And so I'm not boasting when I share some of these stories, but when I'd be traveling, which I traveled a lot, doing this show, and also my day job with Backpacker Magazine, and managing all the aspects of the editorial side for that. So I'd be in airports or on planes, and I was always just shocked at how many people would like just come up to me, and it always felt good to be
Hmm.
approachable, to feel like people they didn't sense any inhibition about coming up and chatting, because that's the way I am, and that's the way I'd like to be perceived, as an accessible individual. But they would come up and share their stories, and sometimes in the funniest ways. I mean, I remember once I was on an airplane, and I was just talking with a person sitting next to me casually. I hadn't met them before, and just chit chatting, and we hadn't left the gate yet. And then suddenly, this guy in the seat in front of me stands up, turns around, and says, "Hey, I love your show, man." And I'm like, "Oh my God." For whatever reason, just my voice was recognizable to him. So I thought that's pretty great. Another time in we were actually in New Zealand, in a parking lot, kind of getting ready for a segment we were doing, and literally, you're over in New Zealand, and somebody in the parking lot, who happened to be an American over there vacationing, comes over and says, "Hey, I love your show, man." And it's the same thing, and it's just like, wow, okay. I wasn't quite ready for
Not ready for the
yeah.
rock star fame?
Well, the average audience we would have sometimes, I don't know, ratings of 4 million viewers and stuff, 4 million viewers, on a good weekend, and that's a lot of people. So, anyway, it was very gratifying for me to get the kind of feedback I got, and
Oh, that's
and
excellent.
I
Excellent.
think it was the right kind of feedback that anybody would appreciate. So.
Now, you only stayed with with Trailside for 3 seasons before you moved on to do Any Place Wild. Um, is there a reason why the production changed over? I mean, I'm not as familiar with Any Place Wild. I have watched a few episodes, and it's a different production. It's not the educational, and also as well, those long intros are gone for more the standard what we see today, which is voiceover work and things like that. But is there any what was the reasoning behind you switching over, if this isn't too delicate a question, and what was the reason for developing Any Place Wild?
Well, there was a couple reasons. Some of them were, more in the business category. Um, Backpacker Magazine did not own the Trailside series. That was
Okay.
owned by the production partner. So, and then I think the other aspect is, creatively. After 3 seasons or so, the those of us on the who were coming from Backpacker Magazine staff side, we were all kind of starting to feel a little bit of, we've already done that, or
Hmm.
what can we do different? And the how-to format of Trailside, was a very highly structured, you know, this is a Trailside episode.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it was highly formatted to the point where I'll give you one more little side story
Sure.
of of a time where I bumped into some kind of fame that I never saw coming. We were out in the California Sierra doing a backcountry ski show. We had kind of set it up so that we could have a base with some cabins that were, run by, I guess, the park or somebody. Yeah, they must have been tucked way back in, and so we had finished up a day's shoot a little bit early. There was still some good light. We were up fairly high and above the camp, um, and the crew was breaking down. I said, "Hey, I'm just going to go ski back, and I'll meet you guys back there." And so I just trekked back on my own to ski back, and it was a few miles to get back there. And I'm skiing down this long incline in a canyon, and I'm noticing there's two people standing, talking to each other further down as I'm coming towards them, and I'm just, shushing along, cross country skiing, and sliding. And as I get closer, I realize I'm listening to what they're saying, and they were parodying the map scene from Trailside. And it was really, you couldn't have scripted this. It was like one of them is pretending to be me, and the other is pretending to be a guest, and they're just like kind of having a joke amongst themselves. And literally, I come skiing by, and they're like, they look up, and they're like, "Oh, it's him." And I said, "Hi guys, how's it going?" And I just skied on by, and they're both just sitting there with their jaws open. It was hilarious. It was hilarious. I don't
Life
think,
imitating.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. I
Anyway,
mean,
I digress. But the question about getting onto Any Place Wild.
sure.
So we started as we got to know the business better. We also figured out, that we had worked with people in the film industry long enough to where we kind of, figured we can do this. And we had our own crew were heavily involved with it, and at the same time we felt like, there's more of a outdoor story, a type of outdoor show we can do here, that the Trailside format it's a good one, it's a successful one. Let's not tinker with it, but we could also do this other format where we can actually tell more of a story
Hmm.
about a place and its history and its the context of how it fits. By and make a little more, bring in more archival footage,
Hmm.
make it a little more, but and also make it more real world gritty.
Hmm.
And so that's where, that and the business reasons to have it be 100% owned by
Okay.
Backpacker. And so we splintered off, and I set up a production company full time just to produce Any Place Wild up here in Maine. So
So you had no involvement with Trailside from season 3 on.
yeah, I pretty much Backpacker left, all the me myself, the crew that were part of Backpacker. We all went over to Any Place Wild.
Okay, because I just watched the one where you hiked around Mount St. Helens, and it was very much more the the star of the show was the location,
Yep.
rather than there being, like you say, that educational aspect.
Yeah,
Uh,
Any Place Wild. That's a good way to think of it. It was less about me as the host, but I was still there. And back to the lesson with Trailside
mhm.
was, I always described, and the crew would say it too, that we were positioning me as host, as we nicknamed it the designated AHB. I'm the designated average human being.
Mhm.
So it was my job to, um, be the representative of the audience to keep it accessible.
Mhm.
So, in some cases, if I was, pretty familiar with something, whatever it might be, lots of times canoeing or kayaking, I didn't want to look like I was too good at it.
Sure.
Um, and then other times it was okay to just be stumbling and fumbling my way through and being natural about it. But it wasn't
Hmm.
hard for me to stumble and fumble, as everybody's certainly seen by
I
now.
don't want to bring that telemark skiing up again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can also say a torn ACL doesn't help. So
Oh, really?
yeah, I
Uh,
was, yeah, trying to do some of those turns with that was tricky. But skiing was not my strong suit by a long shot.
I
So
could see the way that they edited that. It was creative, but obviously, and the expert knew what she was doing greatly.
yeah,
Now, so many shows have forgotten it. I mean, Any Place Wild and Trailside now are decades old.
yeah,
And you're lucky because, I mean, your first three seasons of Any Place Wild, the first three seasons of Trailside and even Any Place Wild are out there in the VHS world. So there are people still watching them, as you know. Um, what do you think the legacy of Trailside and Any Place Wild is? What do you want it to be?
well, I guess if I could say it in a few words,
Hmm.
and you've pretty much already conceded that I've accomplished it. uh, One of the highest compliments anybody could ever pay to me is that after seeing the show, they went out and did it, and they wouldn't have done it had it not been for that. So I think that's how I would like it to be remembered.
It's quaint, which a lot of PBS shows are, and obviously a lot of the fascination is people seeing the aging gear, but it still has some relevance. I mean, it's still watching PBS is a much gentler journey than it is watching, something that is designed to thrill. And it does appeal to people who are just average, everyday people. Now,
Yep.
do you follow productions today? Because one of my, we're getting to the end of this now. Because I mean, I've kept you for way too long. Do you pay attention to what productions are out there today? Is there anything that impresses you? Because I do want to touch a little bit. You see the gear today. You see what people can do with drones, and it's even in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, they would have. Do you look at it and drool? Is there any productions you see today that impress you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's interesting because I regularly attend the Banff Mountain Film Festival tours and that sort of thing, which is probably what I see the most of in sort of the genre that I was in. And I guess what I see is, to me these days, it feels a little more. If you're speaking of just say the Banff kind of series,
Mm-hmm.
it feels just overstimulated,
Sure.
and more the emphasis on, hey, look at what I can do with a drone camera,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like after a while it's missing the point.
Sure.
So some of the films I like, I just saw the one on Chris Tompkins on her legacy down in South America, preserving wildlands, and I was very taken by that. And that, I think Jimmy Chin was one of the producers on that, and really had a nice sensitivity to the subject. And of course, it resonated deeply with me because of the effort to preserve wildlands. But it was just a dramatic landscape and compelling human story. It was, there was romance in there. I mean, it was really great. So I think what Jimmy did with, was it Mayru, was a great one. It felt a little bit unfinished, but it was powerful.
Because there's a lot more that you can do. I just look at it and I think the number of production people that you had out there and what you were doing. There are a lot of people on YouTube. You don't necessarily have to even go to big productions now to see some really excellently produced stuff. People doing adventure travel and everybody's got a camera in their pocket. But I remember when I first started looking at this, and the AT episode is what comes to mind. There was a fellow called Squatch, and he'd worked in the production industry, and he produced some on the PCT where they also interviewed people on the trail. And it just goes to show it doesn't have to be life threatening or jackassy to be an interesting and engaging video, because the environment is the key, and the personal stories are very much the key as well.
Yeah, I guess that's what I feel. And if we were an example of that, it clearly wasn't about the equipment. It wasn't about the gear. Um, it was about making that connection with somebody sitting at home, and and you're really being genuine about that.
Yeah. I mean, I do encourage, if anybody listens to this as a podcast, to look at those PCT videos. They're fantastic, and he did a whole series on the AT as well. And there's certainly a lot of people on YouTube that are producing good, interesting, personal content, and I do like that as well. Of course, I do hope they're all following Leave No Trace as well, which isn't always the case.
Yeah.
Now, personally, what have you been? I mean, I say, what have you been doing since? Which is like, what have you been doing for the last 40 years? But, I mean, what have you been doing since Trailside and Any Place Wild, and what awards are you most, proud of from, for the last however many years?
Oh. Um,
What did you do once you got behind, out of the front of the camera again?
Well, I certainly continued on with a lot of my work in the outdoor world, got involved with a number of exercises or projects in the publishing world. And I think the best way to explain it, I mean, I could give you the chapter and verse of going back 30,
Sure.
40 years, but I don't think anybody would want to suffer through all of it. The theme that I landed with on is, there were some years in the peak of doing the television programming and my professional work where I was traveling a lot. I mean,
Sure.
I would, I think a couple of years I tried to actually count the days I was on the road, and oftentimes it would be more than half the year. So I traveled a lot. I had a great network of friends and associates all over the country and all over the world in some cases. Um, but in order to do that, one of the trade-offs is, in many ways, because it was publishing and the way publishing is set up, you had to be willing to relocate and be mobile in some ways, many ways. And so I often would, didn't live in the same place for more than 5 years, 5, 10 years, and I wasn't home long enough to really get to know how my community worked. When I oftentimes I'd be selling the house and I realize we're moving out and I barely know the guy who lives next door.
Hmm.
Because when I was home, I'd want to spend it just with my family and maximize my time at home. Um, but I never really had a chance to get involved with community. So as I um, have gone on, I've increasingly focused on you know trying to immerse myself in my local community and really understand what makes essentially a village work. And I think I've done a pretty good job at understanding that and appreciating that. And so I really focus all my energy these days on being hyper local, um, and working on the problems right here in my own backyard. And I think it works because,
Mm.
especially during the pandemic, you feel like so much in the world is kind of out of your control, and things are happening that you're like you just don't understand, or there's problems are so big. How could I, as one person, ever really impact them? And I kept finding myself circling back to this notion of, well, I can really have a big impact right here. I can be on the planning board, I can be on the school board, I can be on the chamber of commerce board, or whatever. I can be involved in I work at volunteer at Habitat for Humanity on the weekends. And um, I'm going to um, the food bank tonight, and they're having an open house, and I'm just so proud to be doing that kind of work. And you can really touch and feel the impact of, it doesn't take much.
Hmm.
And I've found that you can really have a big impact. And you also find that there is this, what I call the matrix in a community. And of course, I'm in a area of the country where it's smaller towns, almost rural. But in these communities, there's like a layer of people that are the ones that are getting stuff done, and they're not the ones that are, you know, well known. But if you want to get something done, whether it's build a new library or put on a benefit concert, you need these people
Hmm.
in the room. And it's great to know. I was at a community meeting day before yesterday about a new park that they want to put up down the road. And I looked around the room and I realized, I probably know 90% of the people in this room,
Hmm.
and it felt really good.
I think the quote is think global, act local.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I think that's what they used to pump into us. I did environmental science at school, so that's what they used to pump into us: think global but act local.
yeah.
And it's good. I mean, that's really commendable to hear that you're still in the public service and you're still out there helping people. And I was going to ask, so it seems like you don't miss it. Do you miss it?
I do, I do. I mean, I have such fond memories. Certainly all the people involved. It was just really a great group. I miss a lot of, about the work. Um, it's very much the way I guess you can imagine anybody would miss a team effort. Whether it's
Hmm.
you were on a sports team, a theater production, a band. It's that camaraderie. Plus, in our case, you were dealing with some really crazy circumstances and weather conditions, and
Hmm.
there was a shared struggle, and you have the pride in pulling through that and having a product that you're really proud of, and that no one else has done up until we did it. So yeah, God, what's not to miss about that? Jeez.
So what do the old bones do now when they go into the outdoors? What's your pursuit?
Let's see.
Are we carrying those injuries like a badge of honor and just do gentle hiking, or is it still kayaking and so on?
Well, I had to promise myself no new helmet sports, so I'll admit to that. No, I still get out quite often. I've had to, scale back few of my ambitions. But no, and sometimes and when I go out in camping in the outdoors, will admit to what they call glamping, which is car
Hmm.
camping. So I've modified some things, but and also I like to spend time with my wife in doing some of this. So doing all of it. So that tempers just how ambitious I'm gonna get. But we do a lot of mountain biking, going out sea kayaking, canoeing, and hiking as much as we can. Yeah, still do a lot of that.
Well, this is going to be my final, and I to go along with your family activities. I have an 8-year-old who I'm trying to get outdoors now. Were you successful in getting your kids to take on the same sort of interest as yours?
Yes, I mean, as you're going to learn if you haven't already, that every one of your kids is going to have their own way of going through the world, and you can only do so much to direct that. So they're going to find whatever they find. But I think both my daughters and now two boys, they're the boys are very active in the outdoors. Were very active and still are. One works for Department of Marine Resources. My daughters are, she's one's in Tasmania actually,
Hmm.
in Hobart, and she's a doctor of marine sciences and civil engineering. Um, and so she's very much involved in getting out in the outdoors, working on echolocation projects all over the world. So she's probably more like a fish in water. She loves to study fish. Um, yeah. So the kids they all have a high appreciation for the outdoors. Yeah,
Well, that seems like that was your ultimate audience, so that's great.
it
Now,
is.
I don't want to keep any more of your time, John. You've been gracious, very gracious, to give me what's close to 2 hours. I much appreciate it, and I do very much enjoy the show. I wish that it was in repeat somewhere out there, but it's not. But I do. I thank you very much for joining me.
You're more than welcome. And again, I'm just flattered that there's so many people that appreciate the series, and certainly your kind words are very nice to hear. So I'm quite humbled by it all, and love to chat with anybody anytime.
Well, that's what I was going to get to as a final. Is there anywhere that anybody can reach you? Do you want people to reach you? Is there a handle? If somebody wants to drop you a line and say, "Hey, John, thank you for all that you've done," is there any way that they can contact you?
Well, they can always reach out by email. I prefer if they didn't show up at my doorstep, but
I
you
don't think
know,
you've got those sorts of fans. You're not the
and
Kardashians, mate.
I know Harry and Meghan just got chased all around New York, so don't do that.
Oh, look,
No.
you were talking about delusions of grandeur. I want to bring you down a
Yeah.
peg or two, mate. But
Yeah, that's fair game. Fair game. No, they can just email me through Facebook. They can. I think they can. There's a way to do that pretty simply.
okay,
So
so they can find you on Facebook if anybody out there wants to actually contact John.
I'll just like the. I can like your podcast, and they can reach me that way. That's great.
That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, this will eventually get out there, and thank you, John. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Now, that was a long episode, but I wanted to give John plenty of time since he was so accommodating in talking to me. I don't expect that many episodes will be that long in the future, and I'll try to keep them to around 45 to 55 minutes. But sometimes the conversation just gets away from you. As for Trailside, check them out, enjoy them, lobby your PBS to bring it back. It was such a good show and a wholesome show. And not just John's episodes, I think Peter Whitaker's trip on the Katy Trail and kayaking in New York, pre 9/11 no less, are wonderful, as are many others. And as regarding the other videos I mentioned, there was a golden age of videos in the late 90s and early noughts before YouTube. I strongly recommend Squatch's videos. They started with his PCT Walk series, but he has numerous AT and other trail videos as well. There's also Cirque's Trek, A Journey on the Appalachian Trail, Appalachian Adventures 2,000 Miles to Maine, and if you want more on the PCT, I recommend Walking the West, hiking 2,600 miles from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail by Green Planet Films, or the more obscure and out of print Resold on the Pacific Crest Trail by John Oxford. And maybe even someday I'll release my meager 3 days on the Bib Track. Next week sees the release of my Bob Butler interview, and if you want to get ahead of the game, search for Trailcast on archive.org and listen to his back catalogue of shows. They are definitely worth it. And finally, special thanks to the bands Tom Jode and Kelly Weiss for providing music for the show, and of course, thank you all for listening to Skippycast.